Imagine a place so dark, so horrifying, that it was designed with one purpose in mind: death. A place that was meant to be a secret, hidden away from the world, where innocent lives were taken by the thousands, all in the name of hatred. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most brutal killing factories of the Holocaust, Sobibor. But why should you care? You might think this is just another chapter from the past, a part of history that's too painful to look at. But understanding what happened at Sobibor and why it was so horrifying is crucial. It teaches us about human cruelty, the danger of ignoring history, and the strength of survival against impossible odds. This isn't just about the past. It's about learning from it, so we never let it happen again. So stick around, because today we're diving deep into one of the most horrific chapters of World War II, and you're not going to want to miss this. Sobibor. To many, it's just a name, a distant part of history. But to those who survived it, it's a nightmare that haunts them forever. Sobibor was a Nazi death camp, one of the worst of its kind, where over 250,000 Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. It wasn't just a camp, it was a killing factory. The Nazis built Sobibor with chilling efficiency, designed to work like a well-oiled machine with the sole purpose of exterminating people. But how did this horrific place come to be? And what was life like for those trapped there? To understand Sobibor, we need to step back in time and explore the rise of the Nazi regime, the establishment of these death camps, and the unimaginable horrors that took place behind Sobibor's gates. The rise of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. In the early 1930s, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power in Germany, capitalizing on a climate of political and economic instability. They promised to restore Germany to its former glory after the devastation of World War I, but their vision was rooted in hatred, discrimination, and violence. Hitler's ideology was built on a belief in the racial superiority of the Aryan race, while targeting Jews, Romani people, disabled individuals, and anyone considered undesirable. This extreme racism led to the horrors of the Holocaust. The Nazi regime's rhetoric and actions were fueled by the idea that certain groups needed to be completely eradicated. This ultimately led to the formation of the Final Solution, a plan to systematically eliminate the Jewish population across Europe. The Nazis didn't just want to segregate or oppress these people. They wanted to wipe them out completely. This racial purity campaign became the foundation of what would become a genocide unlike any the world had ever seen. In 1941, as part of the Final Solution, the Nazis began mass shootings, rounding up Jews and other undesirables and executing them in large numbers. However, they quickly realized that these methods were too slow, too visible, and too emotionally taxing on the German soldiers. They needed a more efficient system, a clean way to kill without the gruesome nature of mass shootings. That's when they began establishing death camps. Camps like Sobibor, which were designed to kill large numbers of people without drawing attention from the outside world. Sobibor wasn't the first, but it became one of the most notorious. The Nazis built it specifically for mass murder, with meticulous planning aimed at turning death into a routine, efficient process. The design and operation of Sobibor. Sobibor was constructed in 1942 in a remote area of Poland. It was located in a forested region, far from major cities and hidden from prying eyes. This isolation meant that it could operate in complete secrecy, and the world would have no idea what was going on within its walls. The Nazis were careful about keeping Sobibor's operation under wraps, knowing full well that if the public ever found out, the consequences could be catastrophic for their image. Sobibor was designed like a machine, with each component functioning in a coordinated manner to kill as many people as possible. The camp had multiple sections, including the reception area, where victims were brought in, and the extermination area, where they were murdered. But the process began well before the victims arrived at the camp. The Nazis used a notorious propaganda machine to prepare the Jews for transport, telling them they were being sent to labor camps, giving them false hope that they would survive. When the victims arrived at Sobibor, they were herded off the trains and told to undress. The Nazis had already stripped away their identities, telling them to leave their belongings behind, promising they would receive them later. They were then forced to march to the shower rooms that were actually gas chambers designed to kill them in a matter of minutes. The Nazis used Zyklon B gas, a chemical that killed the victims through suffocation. The victims were told to stand in the shower rooms while the gas was released. As the gas filled the chamber, the victims would struggle to breathe, suffocating in what was essentially a tomb of poison. This process was quick, efficient, and deadly. The scale of the horror. The scale of Sobibor's operations was horrifying. In its short existence, Sobibor claimed the lives of an estimated 170,000 to 250,000 Jewish men, women, and children. The sheer magnitude of the killing is mind-boggling. It was a machine of death that operated day after day, relentlessly, without pause. The Nazis worked to erase all traces of their actions. After the victims were killed, their bodies were burned to dispose of any evidence. Large crematoria were built to incinerate the bodies, and the ashes were scattered in the surrounding forests. The Nazis believed that by destroying the evidence, they could erase the crime from history. The process at Sobibor was a system of industrialized death, designed to be efficient and anonymous. The victims were treated like nothing more than objects, stripped of their humanity, dignity, and lives. For the Nazis, this was a business, an operation meant to execute and dispose of human beings without hesitation or remorse. The escape from Sobibor. In the midst of this overwhelming horror, there was resistance. In 1943, a group of prisoners, led by Leon Feldheimer and others, decided they would no longer be passive victims. They knew that escaping Sobibor was an almost impossible task, but they had no choice. They had to try. The prisoners began to quietly organize, communicating with one another, spreading word of their plans. They knew that even the slightest mistake could lead to their deaths, but they were willing to risk everything. They planned to kill a few of the guards, overpower the others, and escape into the nearby forest, hoping to make it to safety. On October 14, 1943, the plan was put into motion. The prisoners had prepared themselves for this moment for months, and it was now or never. They managed to overpower several guards, leading to the escape of over 300 prisoners. However, the escape was far from perfect. Many of those who fled were captured, and many died in the process, either from the guards or from the unforgiving wilderness. But for those who made it, the escape was a powerful symbol of human willpower. It was proof that, even in the face of the most brutal odds, the human spirit could resist, fight back, and survive. The escape from Sobibor was one of the few successes in a world that seemed to offer no hope, and became a beacon of resilience in the darkest time of the Holocaust, the destruction of Sobibor. After the escape, the Nazis knew they had to act swiftly. They could not allow a death camp to remain exposed. In 1943, the Nazis decided to dismantle Sobibor, destroying any evidence of the atrocities that took place there. The buildings were burned down, the rail tracks removed, and the gas chambers demolished. The camp that had been a factory of death was erased from a map, as if it had never existed. But despite the Nazis' best efforts to cover their tracks, the legacy of Sobibor could not be erased. The survivors carried the stories with them, and as the world began to learn about what had happened, Sobibor became a symbol of the Holocaust horrors. Today, Sobibor is a memorial. The ground where so many people lost their lives now serves as a reminder of the depths of human cruelty, but also the incredible strength of those who survived. The stories of Sobibor are not just about suffering and death. They are also about courage, defiance, and the will to live. The human cost of Sobibor's machine of death. It's essential to understand the human toll Sobibor took, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of lives forever shattered, families torn apart, and generations lost. Sobibor was a place where the Nazis reduced human beings to little more than objects. The Nazis dehumanized their victims in ways unimaginable to most of us today. The prisoners who arrived at Sobibor were not simply stripped of their clothes and possessions. They were stripped of their identities, their families, and their very humanity. Most of the people sent to Sobibor had been living in some form of confinement for months or even years before they arrived at the camp. The Nazis had implemented various means of persecution long before the mass exterminations began. Jews had been subject to ghettos, forced labor, and mass shootings in other areas of Europe. So by the time they were sent to Sobibor, they had already experienced unimaginable horrors. The journey to Sobibor, however, was a death sentence in itself. Those who were sent to Sobibor were often selected from large roundups in nearby villages, cities, or even from the ghettos. They were transported in cattle cars, packed like sardines with barely enough room to breathe. The conditions on the trains were inhumane. Victims had no food or water for days, no bathrooms, and no space to move. Many people died on the way to Sobibor itself, victims of dehydration, suffocation, and exhaustion before even reaching the camp. For those who made it to Sobibor, it was only the beginning of their suffering. Upon arrival, the prisoners were greeted by harsh commands and barking orders from the guards. They were told they were being relocated, told that they would be assigned to work camps. These lies were part of the Nazis' efforts to maintain order and prevent panic. The prisoners were herded off the trains and marched through the camp's gates. The Nazis wanted to avoid causing any suspicion, so they went to great lengths to make the entire camp look like a regular labor camp, complete with the illusion of work. One of the most chilling aspects of Sobibor was its carefully orchestrated system of deception. When prisoners arrived, they were told that they would be given showers to cleanse themselves after their long journey. The Nazis even went so far as to paint the gas chambers to look like shower rooms, so that the prisoners wouldn't immediately realize the truth. It was a cruel trick, designed to keep them calm and to minimize resistance. After disrobing, they were pushed into the gas chambers, which were deceptively disguised as shower facilities. Once the doors were locked, the Nazis released a poisonous gas that would quickly kill the victims. The Nazis made sure to keep the killing process as efficient as possible. The Nazis even had a designated team of workers. Prisoners were forced to help carry out these operations. These prisoners were forced to remove the bodies from the gas chambers, strip the clothes from the victims, and dispose of the bodies. Many of these workers were given special treatment, as they were forced to perform the most gruesome tasks without any choice. For some, this temporary role allowed them to stay alive a little longer, but it came with its own horrors. The systematic nature of the killings at Sobibor was terrifying. It wasn't simply about murdering people. Every detail had been calculated to ensure maximum efficiency. The camp's layout was designed to funnel victims straight from the train station to the gas chambers, with minimal movement. Once the victims were killed, the Nazis employed a group of prisoners known as Sonderkommandos to deal with the bodies. These prisoners would drag the corpses out of the gas chambers, burn them, and scatter the ashes. One of the most disturbing aspects of Sobibor's operation was how the Nazis systematically erased all traces of the victims. The Nazis burned the bodies to eliminate evidence, but it wasn't just the physical evidence they worked to erase. They also sought to eliminate any evidence of the lives of the people who had been murdered. The Nazis believed that by eradicating all traces of the prisoners' lives, whether it was their names, belongings, or even their memories, they could make sure their actions would never be remembered. But despite their best efforts, the memory of Sobibor lives on. The role of the Nazis in Sobibor, the soldiers who worked at Sobibor, were key players in its horrifying operation. They were a mixture of German soldiers, SS officers, and Ukrainian collaborators, who were responsible for carrying out the brutal killings. Some of these guards took pleasure in their work, committing atrocities with a sense of coldness and indifference. They viewed the prisoners as less than human, merely objects to be disposed of. However, not all of the soldiers working at Sobibor were true believers in the Nazi ideology. Some were there because they were forced into service. These men were often under direct orders to follow through the tasks assigned to them, and some lived with the guilt of their participation for the rest of their lives. Some even rebelled in subtle ways, sabotaging the machinery of death whenever they could. There was, however, an interesting dynamic that occurred in Sobibor with regards to the SS officers and the role of the prisoners. Some prisoners who were forced to do the dirty work within the camp, such as cleaning out the gas chambers or disposing of the bodies, became aware of the full scale of the operation, but were helpless to stop it. The Nazis used this forced labor to their advantage, creating an efficient cycle of death and destruction. By doing this, they removed the emotional burden of execution from themselves. It was a cold, calculated strategy designed to maintain the illusion of order and prevent any moral questioning from interfering with the systematic killing. One of the most infamous figures in Sobibor's history was the camp commandant, Franz Stangl. He was known for his efficiency and cruelty, and he played a critical role in organizing the daily operations of Sobibor. Stangl believed in the necessity of the work he was doing, and he ensured that all operations ran smoothly, with little regard for the lives lost in the process. It is chilling to think about how he saw the camp not as a place of suffering and death, but as a well-managed facility. The very fact that such people existed, men who viewed mass murder as a job, is a haunting reminder of the depths of dehumanization and cruelty that can emerge in times of extreme ideology. The officers and the guards involved in Sobibor were often deeply loyal to the Nazi cause. Their loyalty was driven by a combination of ideology, fear, and the power they held over prisoners. Sobibor was a place of absolute control, where the Nazis held the lives of others in their hands, deciding who would live and who would die, and the prisoners had no way of stopping the machinery of death that surrounded them. The mental and emotional toll on survivors. For those who managed to survive Sobibor, the emotional and mental toll was profound. The trauma of living through such a horrific experience stayed with many survivors for the rest of their lives. The memories of the screams, the gas chambers, the bodies, and the brutality haunted them long after the war ended. Survivors often carried deep scars, both physical and psychological. Many lost their families at Sobibor, and for those who escaped, the memories of their lost loved ones were a constant reminder of the brutality they had witnessed. The emotional weight of these losses was a burden that many struggled with for years after the war ended. The experience of surviving Sobibor was one that left permanent psychological scars. The grief, guilt, and trauma were overwhelming for many. For some, even after they reached safety, they were never truly able to escape the horrors of the past. Sobibor's story is not just about numbers and facts. It's about the lives lost, the families destroyed, and the people who fought against impossible odds. It's about the cruelty of the Nazi regime, but also the strength of the survivors who refused to let their stories be forgotten. As we reflect on the horrors of Sobibor, we are reminded of the importance of remembering history. We must never allow the memory of the Holocaust to fade, and we must always stand against hate, discrimination, and violence wherever they exist. The survivors of Sobibor remind us that, even in the darkest times, there is always room for hope, courage, and the strength to fight for survival. Thank you for watching this deep dive into Sobibor's tragic history. If you found this video meaningful, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. History is something we cannot forget, and it's through sharing these stories that we ensure they live on. Together, we can continue to remember and honor the victims of the Holocaust and the lessons that we must carry with us every day.